Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another genre, guys. I am the Fetching Table. Did I say that right, Lou?
Close.
Close. Darn. Okay, well, I'll get to that.
Better, but not. You'll practice. You'll get there.
And you will shortly find out why I am named as such, because we are going to be talking about, well, basically a travel log, a travel film. We are talking today about Around the World in 80 Days. Wait.
No.
Wait. Sorry.
These jokes cease to be funny at a certain point. You're dealing with a classic movie, for goodness sakes.
Okay. Here we go. There we go. Right?
No, that's not the one.
No, that's not. No. Okay, sorry.
I'll give you a hint. David Niven, Shirley MacLaine, and Cantinflas.
Here. This is the one then.
That's the one.
There we go. Around the World in 80 Days. And I think this is one of those films where everyone has heard the title Around the World in 80 Days. They know that it's famous. They probably aren't really too sure what it actually is about. And I don't know how many people have watched this one, especially in
millions.
In these modern times in 2024, in our current year. Let me put it that way.
I think you just shivved Lou.
I'm sorry.
No, the whole reason we're here is because people should watch it if they haven't, and we're going to tell them why, right?
My gag at the beginning of this with all those various posters, it was a gag, but at the same time, I will say it was tough finding this one. Even on Prime, I was having a hard time kind of like getting to this particular one specifically and Googling it. The original. And Googling it, that darn David Tennant movie keeps popping up all the time. So it's not out there. I would say
except no substitutions, folks, when you go Googling. No
substitutions, yeah. So as you might be able to tell from the poster, this is a movie about a couple of folks who travel all around the world in the span of 80 days. Did I summarize that right, Lou?
That's about it, yeah.
All right, great. All right, thanks a lot for joining us. Hope you like the show. We'll see you next week. No.
Hey, folks, this is one of the great movies of all time. It really is. It is one of the biggest movies of all time. It is one of the biggest casts of stars of all time. And by the way, the producer, impresario behind this, a guy named Mike Todd, invented the term cameo performance, which you now know from other movies of big stars taking little parts in a movie and being highlighted for a moment or three.
Well, and this movie was full of cameos. It was wild, and I can see.
Indeed, you might say from one of our previous movies, my God, it's full of stars.
Ooh, I see what you did there.
You're cheating by saying that's from one of our previous movies. It was recorded from the previous movie in the series.
Yes, well, okay, but they replayed it, so.
Yeah.
Are you saying 2010 was the David Tennant version of 2001?
No, but I'm saying in my headcanon, that's the one that exists.
Yeah, okay, I got you.
Woo! Well, so this movie was based obviously on the famous novel by Jules Verne, which was written back in 1873. However, the movie itself was made in 1956, so a couple of years later. And the reason why I'm kvetching is because it was 182 minutes, 3 hours long. Lou, you're killing me with these.
Including a 10-minute title sequence at the end that you've got to watch because it's a classic all by itself.
Yeah, but it was a good movie.
And an intermission. There's an intermission in this one as well.
And an entr'acte and all those good things they used to have in movies.
Yes.
Because they wanted to sell more popcorn and stuff like that.
Lou,
but there was a tradition in those days of what they called a roadshow picture, which were these movies that had intermissions and introductions and that played in very, very limited release in very special theaters before they went wide.
Oh,
so this was one of those.
So that
for that matter, Ice Station Zebra was presented that way originally too. So it's a tradition that lasted quite a while.
Well, that explains the release dates plural, because the first one is October 17th, 1956, and then the second is December 22nd, 1956.
That's right.
So
it opened probably LA, New York, Chicago, a few other big cities first, and then widespread. And indeed, Mike Todd held a 1-year anniversary party for this movie where he invited just 13,000 of his closest friends and took over Madison Square Garden. And the party attracted party crashers because they heard there were going to be prizes given out. And it was a totally chaotic thing. There's some footage of it in the special features if you decide to buy the discs that are quite outlandish. They had a circus. They had all kinds of food. And people were coming in off the street just to freeload, basically. And at one point, supposedly, Todd turned to his assistant, handed him a ring of keys and said, "Here, you lock up. I'm out of here," and got sick of the whole thing. He and his lovely wife, Elizabeth Taylor.
Ah.
But anyway.
Can you give us the rundown?
Was this?
Would have been second, I think. Yeah. But he died about a year after this movie came out in a plane crash, unfortunately. Oh. And that was, then she married another guy. And then, of course, hey, here we are back again at Liz and Dick. Who's afraid of Around the World? But you want a summary. Okay.
I want a summary. There
is a guy named Phileas Fogg, who is the ultimate proper English gentleman, who runs everything in his life on a strict schedule and by the clock, and is a member of a place called the Reform Club for similarly stuffy English gentlemen. And he keeps losing valets, butlers, because they can't stand him being so strict. And this is his brand new one, a guy named Passepartout, who, of course, in the original book was French, but is here played by Cantinflas, a Mexican actor who was, at the time of making this movie, the richest movie actor in the world. Did you know that? Yeah, because he was a huge star, not in this country, but everywhere else. And he was a circus acrobat, and he was kind of the Mexican Charlie Chaplin, which you can kind of get a feel for from even the way he's dressed in this film.
Yeah.
Anyway, the day that he goes to work for Mr. Fogg, played by David Niven, he's at his club, and they're talking about things, and he says, "Well, with modern transportation, I bet you could go around the world in 80 days. And they basically say, "Oh, you want to bet?" And he says, "Yes, I'll leave tonight." And they look at him, "Don't you want to prepare? Don't you have to do anything?" No, I figured it all out, and we're going. And at that point, he and Passepartout decide, or he decides, and Passepartout goes along with a big bag of money to go around the world in 80 days. Now, what's happened around London is that the Bank of England has been robbed. And so he leaves at a very strange time because people wonder, maybe he has all this money to go around the world. They start to decide that maybe he's the bank robber, which of course he isn't. And so a detective, Mr. Fix, played by Robert Newton, who you will all know if you remember the Treasure Island of Disney, played Long John Silver in his last movie, alas, before he passed away, is on their trail and keeps dogging them. And they go around the world, and so did the movie in what was called Todd A.O., which was Mike Todd, who started out doing Broadway shows and reviews at the World's Fair and was a character. He was an all-American entrepreneurial nut who won and lost countless fortunes. At one time, he owned the Del Mar racetrack in L.A. and lost that gambling on the horses on the track. Anyway, he had this idea that this would be the greatest movie ever made and set out to make it. And so they travel the world. And in the process, at one point when they're in India, they save a young lady played by Shirley MacLaine, who is the wife of a guy who died. And in those days, the custom was when the guy dies, you throw his wife on the funeral pyre along with him, and they save her. And along the way, they run into everybody you can possibly imagine. And maybe some you can't. Everyone from Sir John Gielgud to Frank Sinatra to Marlene Dietrich, and there's Shirley as the Indian maiden. And by the way, Shirley MacLaine said in making this movie that she learned huge things. This was her third film, I believe, that Marlene Dietrich taught her how to find her key light and how to stand and how to move. Oh. And so she really appreciated that. Anyway, they literally shot this movie all around the world. Now, not all the stars actually went to all those places. A lot of it was second unit. But they go from London across to Paris. And in Paris, they're going to take the train, supposedly to Marseille, to catch a boat. But the train tunnel collapsed, and they have to get there another way. And so there's this famous scene where they go in a balloon, a hot air balloon, and fly over the Alps. And there's this great moment. where Passepartout is scooping snow off the top of the Alps to put in the champagne bucket for their lunch on the balloon. And they wind up in Spain, and they're stuck. And they wind up with Passepartout entering a bullfight to facilitate their moving onwards. They travel to Marseille. They travel on a steamship across and through the Suez Canal and to India, where they're going to take a brand new first open train across the Indian subcontinent, except, of course, it isn't really finished. It's broken in the middle, and they have to go by elephant. And
the first instance, I think, in the movies of fake news.
Yes. Well, he says when they get there, I guess is that the one that's Ronald Colman in charge of the train?
Yeah.
And they tell him, well, we read that this was finished. He says, oh, it must have been the Telegraph. You'd never see that in the Times. So there's all this wonderful, English snobbery games playing going on. And anyway, from there to Yokohama, and from Hong Kong, and then Yokohama. And all this time, Mr. Fix, the detective, is riding along and befriending Passepartout because he's trying to get the goods on him. And his arrest warrant keeps showing up just after they leave British territory. And then they cross the Pacific, of course, and wind up in America and encounter, there they are on a Chinese junk. And that's, of course, Robert Newton over on the left, and then Niven and Shirley MacLaine. Then they get to San Francisco, and there's a big election going on and a parade, and they're going to take the train, the transcontinental train. But, of course, the Indians have something to say about that, too. And Buster Keaton is the conductor on the train, just to give you an idea. And Sinatra is in the scene in San Francisco as the honky-tonk piano player. And supposedly Mike Todd said, if you're going to get somebody to play a honky-tonk piano player, you either get Frank Sinatra or Hoagie Carmichael, and you know which one I wanted, so I got him. And most of these stars who played the cameos were basically sold on doing the gig because it would only take a day or two. And so they had to schedule everything to fit these people in when they were available. Anyway, after a lot of Cowboys and Indians stuff, they get to a spot where the train has disappeared, and they rig up this, what they call a wind wagon, which is like a handcar, a rolling cart with a big sail on it. And they use the wind.
On the rails. On the
rails going across. And anyway, they wind up on the East Coast and get on a boat to go across to England, to Liverpool. The only problem is the boat doesn't have enough gas to go as fast as they are going, because he's telling him put everything in there. And so he, of course, has this bag of money. So he buys the boat, and they literally dismantle the boat and burn it up in the boiler to make the steam engine, get them all the way to Liverpool, where...
It's kind of important on that part to understand that the reason that they don't have enough fuel is that it was supposed to be going to Venezuela.
Right.
And he bribes the captain instead to take it across.
Played by Jack Oakey, who was a wonderful guy. I knew his wife pretty well way back when.
Oh.
She was a lovely lady. And for those of you who have ever been to Los Angeles and never been to UCLA on that sprawling campus, that was a bean field that Jack Oakey owned from his proceeds as an actor and gave to the state of California to build UCLA.
Wow.
So there's a little trivia for you. Anyhow, when they get to Liverpool, Mr. Fix is there with his arrest warrant and arrests him for being the thief of the Bank of England, which of course he is not. And by the time they can get that straightened out and get released, they get back to London, but it's been 81 days, they believe.
And he's lost the wager. He's
lost his money. He's lost the wager, but he has found love with Shirley. And Passepartout goes out to get a minister to marry them, and finds out that he didn't figure on the international dateline. And I'm not spoiling a thing. This is a famous story. And that, in fact, he's only got about 45 minutes or an hour to get to the Reform Club by the appointed time. And, of course, even that, the taxi driver, played by John Mills, won't get the horse to move. He goes on foot, and he hits a group of like Salvation Army people who don't want him to gamble. Here's all the guys in the Reform Club. You might recognize Trevor Howard and Robert Morley and Finlay Curry. Anyway, he gets there. And when he does, Robert Morley says the famous last line of the movie where he says, well, this is the end. But it's not the end of the movie, because now are the credits, because there weren't any at the front, because I neglected to mention that at the very beginning of the movie is a prologue designed to introduce you to the idea of the book and the original French silent movie of it, Trip to the Moon, of another of Verne's books. Mm-hmm. And it's delivered by the most famous journalist of that era, Edward R. Murrow. And it's also where the screen goes from a regular size screen to the huge Todd A.O. screen. And I should mention, he invented or co-invented and backed Todd A.O., which was a widescreen process. He was an original backer of Cinerama, but he said the problem with Cinerama is it's got 3 cameras and 3 projectors, and I want to do it all with one. And he found a scientist who could figure it out. And this was the movie that introduced that system, which was then copied by everybody else. Anyway, so we go from Edward R. Murrow and rockets blasting off, real rockets, to the end. And now Saul Bass, who, if you don't know who he was the most famous credit guy, I would say, until Maurice Binder came along and started doing all the Bond ones. And he did just amazing credits. But in this case, he invented basically cartoon symbol characters for all of the characters.
Yeah.
And there was Fogg is a high-stepping, top-hatted clock, because his whole thing is staying on time. And Passepartout is the penny farthing bicycle we see him riding at the beginning of the movie. And Aouda, the Shirley MacLaine character, is a series of veils and just 2 big eyes. And they travel through all of those cameo people, plus all the technicians, in a 10-minute cartoon that is one of the great parts of this movie as well. And by the way, when I saw the film the first time, which was in its first revival, at the same place it premiered, the Carthay Circle Theater, which we all know from its connection with Disney, I have a picture somewhere of myself and my father going and wearing identical suits and ties, and it was a big deal. They created for that theater a curtain, a huge theater curtain, which was red, kind of shiny, velvety material with all of these characters from the titles stitched into it in gold thread, running up and down and up and down and up and down this huge. Wow. I don't know what happened to it eventually. I do know that for a while it was at the Egyptian Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. And then I think it went to the Chinese for a little while. And then Debbie Reynolds, who was putting together a museum of movie memorabilia, bought it and was, I think, going to put it in this museum she was going to build. And then she had her hotel in Vegas. And I'm not sure if they ever got it on display or where it is. But that just shows you the kind of event motion picture this became. And of course, it won, 5 Academy Awards, was nominated for many more, and beat out some pretty heavy competition for Best Picture. And anyway, I guess I've talked too long about the substance. We should talk about the style and God, talk about great music, great second unit photography of all these places, cinematography anyway, because they would cut from a real shot of, say, a sunset on the Indian Ocean to them on the deck of a ship with just the exact same gorgeous orange light of that sunset on their faces. And it gave a verisimilitude to this movie that nobody had ever seen anything like it.
It was very smooth. And I'll mention that it did quite well at the box office. It started off with $6 million and it made back $42 million, which in 1956 wasn't anything to sneeze at.
No, indeed. No, indeed. So had you guys seen it before, and what did you think and all that sort of thing?
I had actually seen this movie once before, I believe when I was in 6th grade. I remember at my elementary school, we had an award for something or other. I don't remember what it was. But we got to watch the movie during an assembly, and they actually had a screen brought in, and it was actually projected onto the screen. We all sat on the auditorium floor and ate popcorn. I don't think I paid any attention to the movie. I think that at the time I was probably just talking to friends, and I didn't remember very much about the movie at all. So it was actually quite a lot of fun to go back and actually get to watch it this time and see everything that was going on.
I hadn't seen it before. I hadn't read the book either. I mean, I was just, like I said, I'd heard of it. I had heard of the book. I knew that it was a classic, but it was a pleasant surprise. It was it was a gigantic movie. It was a huge movie. It was like the scope of it was incredible. And it was a movie which, like, I mean, it basically has a little bit of everything in it. Anything that you could really want in there.
Yeah, and certainly all of the various acrobatic things that Cantinflas was able to do. He not only fights a bull, he joins a Japanese circus and comes flying down out of the sky in that. He's amazing. He is really amazing. And of course, really nobody in America, maybe a few people who had come from Mexico back then, but nobody had ever even heard of him. And here's this guy who was internationally famous and was totally unknown in this country. So
that was one of the points I wanted to make about the movie, is that it does not focus as much on Phileas Fogg as I think I would have expected. I would say this is more Passepartout's movie than it is his.
Well, sure. Absolutely. I mean, you need him as the straight man, if you will, for Passepartout, as the foil. And of course, Robert Newton and Passepartout have some wonderful interactions, because it takes Passepartout a whole lot of time to figure out that Newton is not playing straight and has an ulterior motive.
And
but
you guys know what Passepartout means, right?
Sure. It's a key. It's a pass key.
But also the literal translation in French is to go all over the place.
Right, but it was used to describe a pass key, a skeleton key, if you will, for manors and hotels and things like that. That's Joe E. Brown, by the way, wonderful comedian back there as the station master out there in the middle of nowhere on the far right. And I mean, any movie that has Japanese circus and bullfighting and flamenco dancing and elephants.
that was actually another thing that I think you kind of you were giving a very brief summary of the movie, but what I liked about the bullfight scene is that the way that Passepartout gets sucked into this thing is that there's only one ship that's got a passage to Bombay, and it's owned by this
to Marseille to catch the one that's going.
Right. Forgetting the order of operations. It's owned by an Arab who commands this ship, and
Gilbert Roland, that famous Arabic actor, and his aide de whatever, Cesar Romero.
Cesar Romero, I was surprised by that.
Who you'll know as the Joker from Batman and so many other things.
The original.
He only comes to this nightclub at night. That's the only place they can meet him. And there's this big flamenco dancing sequence.
By Jose Greco, who was a famous dancer in those days.
Passepartout has a great weakness for women that is displayed all throughout the movie. He's constantly chasing them. And when they get done with the big flamenco dancing scene with him, there are some ladies who come out to also dance, and Passepartout obviously wants to dance with them. And what he does with them is a mock bullfight using a tablecloth that he steals from the Arab's table. And it's a beautiful dance sequence. And when Phileas Fogg goes to approach this Arab to try and book passage on his ship, he's first told that you can't approach this guy. He's an important fellow, and he's not allowed to speak to anybody. And he says, well, maybe you can pass him a message. I'd like to book passage on his ship, and money's no object. And the Arab whispers to his aide-de-camp, and he says, well, actually, we'll take you wherever you want to go. It's not going to cost anything. But there's a bullfight tomorrow, and I want to see him actually in the ring with a real bull. And so Passepartout, unfortunately, now has to actually conduct a real bullfight. It's one of the best scenes in the movie.
Yes, yes. And the settings for it. My God, I don't know where that town was or how much of it was real and how much was built by them. But if any of you have ever seen pictures of Siena, Italy, and this thing called the Palio, which is this knights in armor race that they run around this giant central plaza, it kind of reminded me of that. It's not a bull ring. It's a town where they've set up a bullfight in the middle of the town. All of the sets, all of the locations are pretty spectacular, Well, and even the little intimate moments, like when Passepartout is stuck in Japan with no money. Oh, because he got shanghaied, so to speak. And when he wakes up, who's the steward on the ship that he's on? Peter Lorre.
My jaw dropped when I saw him, and I was looking at it. I was like, is that Peter Lorre? And he's only in it for like 20 seconds.
Yeah.
That's all he needs.
but it is him.
That's cameos. I mean, like I said, Marlene Dietrich, George Raft, quite a few famous. There's Marlene Dietrich in the middle there.
Yeah, and then old Blue Eyes at the top right.
Right.
Well, I have to say, coming into this movie cold, I was really surprised that there was no disclaimer ahead of this film saying something along the lines of, this movie is a product of its times, and in the year 2024,
a trigger warning,
ever so much more enlightened than this, because I can only imagine, like I would bet that half of North America watching this film would probably have a seizure. I guess a trigger would be very, very triggered by a lot
of they and their triggers can go around the world as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But I will point out that is one more reason with all of these movies that we do that you really want to buy the disc and have the physical media, because who knows what they'll do to it in streaming and broadcast down the road. And this one has some great special features. In particular, there is a biography, a documentary about Mike Todd that features a lot of Elizabeth Taylor talking and is narrated, hosted by Orson Welles. So there's a cameo that isn't in the movie, but is in the special feature. And it's also interesting to me, some of these things where they show you the trailers and the ads and who they put in them and who they don't, because there's only so much time you can put into a trailer. But this thing, everybody's in it. Glynis Johns. God, I'm just trying to think through all the different people.
Andy
Devine, yes. John Carradine, rather prominently in the Western scenes. And of course, see, this is the kind of guy that Todd was, that everything was about a wonderful spectacle. They just happened to get to San Francisco when there's an election going on, and there's this massive, massive parade down the main street. It's got nothing to do with the plot of the movie, really, but what the heck? Give him some showmanship. That's the kind of guy he was.
Well, it was, I think what I was really kind of impressed with by this movie as well is the fact that, would you say that this is almost the most multicultural movie of its time?
Maybe, in the sense that it visits all those places.
It visits all those places, and I
don't think they make a big point of it as far as, it's a movie about progress, and that's really what the thing with Morrow sets up at the front.
Yeah, and it's like they aren't getting cheap well, I mean, it's there are comedic moments, obviously, but they're not doing it at the expense of the places where they visit. And you can feel a bit of a reverence for each of those places.
The best example of that, honestly, is when they're in Hong Kong trying to drop off Shirley MacLaine's character with her erstwhile uncle who's supposed to be there. And the shop is closed up, and David Niven, Phileas Fogg, is speaking to a Chinaman who's passing by. And
played by Philip Ahn, who is a great Asian actor who is in everything.
Well, he starts speaking to him very slowly and carefully in a sort of almost broken English, hoping he'll understand. And he responds back in perfect English.
Yes.
and sort of schools him. And it's like, look, you don't have to talk to me like I'm an idiot. I know exactly what you're saying.
You know what it reminds me of? One time my parents were in Puerto Rico, and they served them some kind of bread rolls that my mother thought were really good. And she doesn't speak Spanish. And when the waiter came back, she said, "Excuse me, what do you call these?" And she pointed to it. And he said, "We call them rolls." And whether he was doing it to dig back a little or just to make fun, or I don't know, but that's the kind of, and really that was a lesson to the audience of this movie, not to presume that other people are somehow inferior or stupid or whatever, but that we're all just different. Yep. We're all just different.
And one of the things that I think makes the movie special is because of the time that it came out in. Yeah, you had the capability of traveling to all these places, especially more easily than they do in the movie, because air travel was a thing. But still, even though you had a rising and bustling middle class, most people couldn't travel the world like you could in this movie. And so seeing these exotic locations, being able to see what different areas of the world look like, fueled the imagination, and it made you excited about seeing those places. And
yes, it was your gazetteer, as they used to call it, of the world.
While you can, I mean, obviously, Hangry found how many remakes of this movie now?
At least 3 and a couple of cartoons also.
You can make these kind of movies now, but they don't have the same impact because, well, now we don't think of traveling the world as being anything special. Well, of course you can do that. You just hop on a plane.
Yeah, now it's less a matter of the technology or the conveyance and more a matter of the safety and the politics as far as going to these places.
And the money.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's a really fair point, though, because a lot of this movie and part of the runtime of it was dedicated towards giving the audience that sort of surreal feeling, that feeling of being in each of those countries. Like usually through the eyes of Passepartout, you would see loving gazes of the countryside, of the flora, the fauna. It really took the time to highlight the geographic, the environmental, the animal differences between all of the various countries they visit, and present them to the audience. And so I wasn't joking when I said this movie was almost like a little bit of a travelogue.
Oh, no, absolutely. It is. You know, I'm looking at this and thinking you were talking about a Mexican playing a Frenchman from the original anyway, Jackie Chan playing the Frenchman part. So that seems to be a tradition of this film too, or this story in film. But,
you know, what blew me, like looking into this film a little bit, though, what I was really stunned by is the fact that apparently the crew, including extras, the cast, including extras, totaled 68,894 people and 7,959 animals, including 4 ostriches, 6 skunks, 15 elephants, 17 fighting bulls, 512 rhesus monkeys, 800 horses, 950 burros. I don't even know what that is. 2,448 American buffalo and 3,800 Rocky Mountain sheep, and a sacred cow that eats flowers on cue.
It sounds like press agentry to me. I doubt there were that many buffalo or horses. But of course, when you talk about the bulls, you only see one bull, although you can tell in a couple of spots that it's more than one being used, because you need a spare, because you need somebody to back it up. The story goes that the very first day of shooting, the guy that they originally hired to direct took all day and got almost nothing done. And Mike Todd was really upset, but he'd never made a movie before. And so he went to this guy and said, well, how come it's taking so long? And he said, well, my boy, trust me, I've been doing this for 20 years and I know what I'm doing and you don't understand. And when Todd persisted, the guy said what later somebody told him was absolutely the wrong thing to say to Mike Todd. He said, well, if you think you can do it better, do it yourself. So he fired him and finished the day the next day and then hired a wonderful director, but an unproven director who had the skill. So this guy, Mike Todd, God, was he a character. What an amazing all-American figure. He was the P.T. Barnum of his day and then some. It's quite a story. And that's another good reason to buy the big disc with the special features, because that biography of him is pretty special. And it's pretty darn clear that he and Elizabeth Taylor truly had a wonderful romantic love affair of a marriage, and that if he hadn't been killed, probably a lot of her later craziness wouldn't have happened.
Well, hard to say.
There's one other interesting thing that I took away from this movie that I had never really been aware of before. And I think it's kind of important to talk about Phileas Fogg. When we're talking about how exacting he is, the reason that his first valet leaves service that you see in the beginning of the movie,
John Gielgud, no less,
is because he demanded that his bathwater be at a specific height, neither 1 inch higher nor lower, and also at a particular temperature. He's very exacting about time. He is at the very least what you would call today somebody who suffers from obsessive compulsive disorder.
Oh, 100%.
And possibly other mental issues. But what I really thought was interesting was his obsession with time. All around his manor are clocks that are all perfectly synchronized. And that actually points to Doc Brown from Back to the Future.
Absolutely.
had I understood that that was a reference in Back to the Future originally, I mean, you could have had the whole Jules Verne inspiration from Back to the Future 3 spoiled in that first movie if you understood the significance of the clocks. So
that's actually a really good point.
It was kind of an interesting touchstone.
And yet, of course, the characters, I mean, Niven is this ultimate controlled, neat as a pin, perfect. And Doc Brown is wacko and all over the map. And that's a wonderful combination, but they both care about time. And of course, you could say maybe they didn't even make that point when they were making Back to the Future. They were just talking about the fact that the movie's about time travel, you know, so.
Certainly. But when you look at the layout of his house, it's hard for me to believe that they didn't intend that to at least be a reference for people who might know, because it's Niven's house is set up the same way with all of the clocks everywhere.
Well, you know, one thing that I do want to say, though, is like let's talk about Niven, the actor, Phineas Fogg.
Who said, by the way, that of all the various roles he did, this was his favorite by far.
He was a gem. I mean, when you first meet the character, I mean, he's very exacting, as you said. He's very focused on time. He very much does not want to, he comes across as very sort of stuffing, as very challenging to deal with, as somebody that, you know, you really, not that appealing. And then throughout the film, you know, there are various tests of his character, like in the photo I've brought up here, for example, with Shirley MacLaine, always jumping to do the right thing, always doing what has to be done to help others when they need it, even if it is at the expense of his own money and time and whatnot. And by the end of the film, you really do feel like this guy's a bit of a hero. And
yet he keeps ignoring her clear affection for him until she just breaks it down and says, for God's sakes, and she says it differently than this, but basically, come on, schlub, kiss me. You know, it's like, here we are, and you're wonderful, and you like me, and I like you, and what the heck?
And it's thanks to that, they found out that they were a day early, and they were able to win the bet.
Yes.
I think that lack of understanding or ability to engage romantically also goes back to his obsessive nature, though. He's
about things, not people.
Yes, he views the world in a different way, and I think that's an interesting portrayal when I don't think it would have been diagnosed that way back then.
And the other fun thing, when they're getting ready to leave, they have this one red bag that he puts all his money in, and he says, don't let it out of your sight. And he tells Passepartout, pack 2 shirts. And he says, I only had the one. He says, all right, don't worry, we'll get everything on the way. So theoretically, all he's got is the clothes on his back and a spare shirt. But then every scene, he's in a new outfit because he's just buying wonderful clothes. He's kind of like Reacher, you know, who travels with a toothbrush and a credit card. It just occurred to me. But not quite the same exactly. But anyway, folks, this is I know we've had a couple of movies that you guys said made you feel bad. Well, this is a feel-good movie and then some. This is just a joy. And, you know, something else. The scope of it, the huge spectacle of it, the international locales, the sets, the scenes do not overwhelm the humanity of it. They are the background against which that humanity plays, whether it's the stars or the cameos or anybody else, and nobody's out of place. You know, the cameo roles in some movies, oh, look, it's so-and-so. Well, certainly there's a lot of that here, but you don't think Buster Keaton is wrong, as you believe him as a conductor of a Wild West train. You believe Ronald Colman and Charles Boyer as the agent for Lloyd's or for Thomas Cook in Paris, who happens to own a balloon. But these people are so good that they stand out because of their famous faces, but they don't stand out because they're really playing even these little bitty parts so expertly and so wonderfully. You know, you got rare formula, you know?
You guys might scoff at this, but especially when he was visiting Japan and like India, you almost got a bit of a Star Trek vibe from this. And what I mean by that is the sort of the heroes, the main characters visiting these strange new worlds that likely most of the audience hadn't seen before either. It was really well done. It was neat.
Well, and if anything, the people who would have seen many of these places were people who fought in World War II, either in the Pacific or in Europe.
That's true.
That old thing, when World War I happened, there was a famous popular song called "How You Gonna Keep Them Down on the Farm After They've Seen Paris," that was worried that our honest, straight American boys would go over there and be perverted by all of that licentiousness and sin and booze and what have you. So I bet there were a lot of fathers who, after the movie, turned to their wives and sons and said, yeah, I was there, and it was like that. And that's not because they were, especially not so much fighting the war because we never really had to invade Japan, but certainly the occupation army was there, and it was there all over Europe too.
Mm-hmm. So, Lorn, you were going to say something.
Oh, just that the place where I really got that feeling you're talking about is when Passepartout is he's basically stuck there looking for work for a while, and you have all of these natives that are keeping a very close eye on him because to them he is the alien and he looks strange, and they're wondering what is this guy doing here. And so I think because the audience sees through his eyes, that's why you get that feeling of alienation, is because he's definitely the odd man out.
Yes. And even though he, as a Mexican actor and unknown to most American audiences, is not somebody they'd normally identify with, he still becomes the audience's way into a lot of these cultures. Kind of like what I said about Scheider in 2010, in that he is the audience saying, what the hell's going on here? He's your window into a strange world. Because let's face it, nobody out there, you may like him, you may find him noble, and you may find him clever. Nobody identifies with Phileas Fogg. They all just think, gosh, he's interesting, but he's a stuffed shirt and like that. But it is just the ultimate feel-good movie, gang. And so you should own it for those times when you don't. And just want to take a couple hours and disappear from the world into the world as it was back then.
I'm just going to quote one of my favorite lines here, which is, "You've been diddled, but it's not often one needs an elephant in a hurry." So it's got some gems in it, that's for sure.
It's well written. It's well directed. It's the score. I sat there watching. I haven't seen it probably in about 10 or 12 years, and remembering all of those themes, that Western theme and the train, and that Indian theme with the kind of swoopy, parts of it remind me of Victory at Sea, Richard Rodgers and all those kinds of big scores. And yet you've got everything from honky tonk piano to Japanese samasans, or whatever that is called, the guitar type thing. And certainly England, and certainly the Oompa band of the Salvation Army people at the end. And there's a whole lot in this thing, folks. There's a whole lot to enjoy.
One of my favorite sly jokes there is with the Salvation Army at the very end, where he's trying to get through this crowd and they're proselytizing and saying you shouldn't give in to sin and gambling. And
the worship. I've got a wager, madam. And wager, you can't do that.
Well, she's talking about the evils of the worship of money, and then she passes the collection plate.
Yeah, and then he hands her a $5. He hands her a $5 to get past her, and she looks at it with scorn. But as soon as he walks away, she looks at it with kind of a smile and says, well, okay, we made £5 out of that guy. It's not so bad after all.
All right, guys, let's do our classic. What did you like? What didn't you like too much about this? And we're going to start with you, Lou.
Oh, well, I like it all. There is nothing not to like, except maybe that as much as you want to admire and like Passepartout, in all of his stuff interacting with Mr. Fix, he's kind of stupid not to catch on sooner. Considering what a guy of the street and a savvy fellow that he is, you would think he would kind of catch on a little sooner, but that's a minor quibble. But
I was kind of thinking the same thing of kind of like, where's he going with this? But I thought there would be more to it, but you're right. And in terms of the what you like the most, I know you liked everything, but
first of all the performances. Like I said, it's one thing to, oh, look, there's a famous face, but none of them are hired, except with the exception of maybe Sinatra, to just be there as somebody famous, because they make a big point of introing him by shooting only the back of his head the first 3 shots, and then finally they come around the side and you see who it is. But everybody else is playing their part to perfection. They're giving it their all for this very, very brief. Nobody else in that movie worked more than 3 or 4 days, maybe 5 for some of the Indian scenes. East Indian. But they're all giving it their all. By golly, they are in the parts. And like I said, you don't find them out of place, even though they're famous. But I love the score, and I love the cinematography, and I love the sheer audacity of this guy who, remember, never made a movie before or since.
Wow.
Never.
That's crazy.
And you can say, well, he had a lot of help, and he had studios, and he had technicians. It's not the same thing, folks. It just isn't. I know that as somebody who's been involved in production, that this guy who lost as many times as he won and failed as many times as he succeeded in his life, could pull this thing off, and not just pull it off, but there's a scene where they're interviewing him at the airport in that documentary, where he says, I've had an interesting life, but I've got to do 2 really great things: make the world's favorite movie and be married to the world's favorite woman, So, and you know what? That's not a bad epitaph, I made Around the World in 80 Days, and Elizabeth Taylor loved me, and I loved her.
That was, that's those are pretty good accomplishments, I got to say.
I was going to say that you could use that resume with pride and like that. Anyway,
Lorn?
It's going to be kind of weird the way I talk about this, because in modern movies, we still go to exotic locations. We still like to see the spectacle of all the places in the world we'll probably never personally get to see. But I don't feel like we do the travelogue movie anymore. And those kind of movies used to be a staple. I think this was probably one of them that sort of created the mold where you did go to all of these places, engage all of these modes of travel, have all the cameos from the famous actors. And the fact that we don't do that anymore, I think, is kind of a shame. So I would say, in a way, that's my favorite part of the movie. Although I also want to say, I don't think we talked enough about Robert Newton. I thought his Mr. Fix was just excellent, and he is a wonderful actor. He's always fun to watch. He always has this twinkle in his eye, and that's what made him such a good Long John Silver, even though they weren't faithful to the book.
If you haven't seen Treasure Island, the Disney version with him as Long John Silver, shame on you. He is the movie, and it's wonderful.
He is the movie, but it's not the book. I have never seen a Treasure Island that has done the book justice. So, but he is an excellent actor, and I think we should probably talk about him some more at some point. What I didn't like was the romance between Phileas Fogg and the Shirley MacLaine character.
Lord,
I know. It's just I just didn't buy it. And part of it is because of how I see Phileas Fogg. I don't see him as being capable of engaging in a romantic relationship. And while I believe that she was fascinated by him, I don't believe that he could reciprocate those feelings. And so that.
Well, let me ask you a question about that.
Sure.
I agree with you to the point where the movie begins. But he probably, in his whole life leading up to this story, if we're talking about the character, never spent as much time with a woman as he does in this movie.
That's true.
And maybe that kind of opened him up to something he was totally unaware of.
I could agree with that if I saw evidence of that in the movie, but most of the time I saw the way that she was reacting to him deliberately ignoring her advances. and so it made it hard for me to believe that at the end, even though she practically insists upon it, that he allowed her to break down his defenses. I just feel
I don't think he's ignoring it. I think it never occurs to him until she presses the point.
Yeah.
It's so alien to his life that it never occurred to him.
I saw it differently. For me, it was all the stiff upper lip kind of a thing. Yeah. And I felt that as attractive as she is, and as much as she was insisting upon it, I still believe that stiff upper lip would have remained in place.
Maybe.
Well, it's funny. Like when he finally clues in, and she finally basically, is blatantly upfront with him and says, "Will you marry me?" He's like, "Oh my God, yes, yeah, whoa, oh gosh!" And so, he immediately tells Passepartout to go and get the.
Yeah, I think it never occurred to him.
Yeah.
He spent his whole life saying, "I'm not the kind of person who gets married, and women or whatever, and I'll be honorable to them, and I'll be just with them, and I'll be helpful." But when she says it, it's the first time he ever seriously considered it and realizes that it's naturally the logical thing for him to do. That's my read anyway. And I think that's the way Niven plays it in that scene.
Well, on my side, I would say, like Lou, I pretty much liked all of this movie. I particularly enjoyed the parts in London as well as the parts in America. There's something that gets me about that sort of Western setting, those old trains. It was really nice. It was really.
Yeah,
really feel like you were transported back to that time.
When you read those statistics on how many animals supposedly were in it, I don't think they had that many buffalo. But when I saw the scene,
oh yeah,
I imagined real trains in that period where the engineer is doing like that guy, just sitting on the cowcatcher waiting for him to go by, knowing it's going to be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours because of those massive herds of buffalo that used to run the plains. And that they just take it as a given of the experiment, and it's no big deal. And of course now it's huge.
And I will say one thing that I understood, I suppose, but which kind of impacted me a little bit more psychologically than I expected it to be, was when they were on that final leg of the journey, they were on that steam-powered paddle boat heading
the Henrietta.
The Henrietta. And as you said in your summary, they basically had to cannibalize the entire ship in order to feed the fire so that the paddles would keep paddling. And there was just something slightly disturbing to me about seeing like a beautiful ship and having it being taken apart piece by piece until it's essentially like a bare skeleton by the time it reaches its destination. For some reason that kind of weirded me out a bit. And I was like, oh, but that's a very, very minor quibble.
By the way, they shot the finale of the ship with all the pieces off it as a model. Todd looked at it and said, "Doesn't read real," bought a ship, put the paddle wheels on it, and then they tore up the real ship.
Yeah.
That's the kind of commitment to doing it right that man had.
That's incredible. Well,
anyway,
go see this.
Get the disc.
Yep. And
you'll want this, and you'll want to show it to your kids and your grandkids. Believe me, it's a film that never gets old.
And if you like oceans, Lou, what do you say?
What do I say about oceans? EO. That's what I say. And I'll just leave it. I'll leave it at that, except that I'll say this. We're going to look at the original of something that's been now remade in many ways. And all I'll tell you is the modern guys try to act cool. The original guys were cool.
Uh-huh.
We're going to fight next week.
Oh, all right.
Okay. That's good. That's good.
This is good. Things are getting spicy. This is good. Well, everybody, thank you once again for listening to another episode of Genre Guys and for our take. What did you think? Have you seen the movie? Have you read the book? Have you seen the Jackie Chan movie? Have you seen the David Tennant movie? If so, how do you feel that they've held up to this whopper of a film? Leave us your thoughts. Give us your comments down below. Let us know. If you're watching this on T3PO, thank you for joining us. And also, we still go back and we still read the comments on these, even if they are slightly delayed in being published like this. So do not hesitate. We love to hear what you think. We love to hear your thoughts, and we love to hear your recommendations. So drop us a line down below. And on that note, I guess we're gonna have to get our boxing gloves all ready and sewn up for next week, because I think it's gonna be a bit of a banger. So don't miss it. And we will see you guys soon.
We hope you enjoyed that special presentation of the Genre Guys here on T3PO. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like it. And if you want to enjoy every episode of the Genre Guys as soon as they are released, be sure to become a member at WW Pro's YouTube channel. What were your thoughts on this amazing film? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. T3PO. Please comment, like, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WDW Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.